I'm going to talk a bit about a supervisor of mine called John Steiner, and there was a very anxious presenter, kept asking him what he wanted to know and one thing and another. And he said, there's one piece of advice I could give you. You can get away with murder as long as you're not dull. So the problem with coming here, as Sue said, is a lot of what I'm going to touch on has already been said. In terms of thinking about these kids in various different dimensions. So I'm going to try not to dwell too much on things that have already been said. But I was thinking about a contextual starting point, which is, having been in psychiatry for 45 years, you realise that one of the things that happens from time to time, I think due to underlying frustrations with the limitations of what we can do, is you'll get the latest cure for all known problems, whether it's psychoanalysis, CBT, research, and all of these things have got important things to say, but in actual fact, no one's got all the answers. There's all sorts of different lenses. They've all got elements of truths in them. But as Stephen Levine said, you've got to be skeptical. You've got to, don't. And the problem is when you're desperate, people tend to get very narrow and they'll sort of they'll hitch their wagon to whatever the latest cure for all known problems is. So this is a government health warning because I'm coming from a psychoanalytic point of view. That isn't to say that we're all social, individual and social animals. And the social is extremely important. But I'm here, my only expertise is thinking about the unconscious processes and my relationship with the patient in front of me. It's not to say that all the other things that we've heard about aren't extremely important. No simple causational explanation, as people have said before. It's very important to know. The other thing, another binary piece of nonsense in my view in psychiatry is it's not nature or nurture, it's both. The genetics are important, but how they relate to the environment. So, you know, it's more complicated than we can possibly get our heads around. And the other thing I'm going to be talking about a lot, in terms of all the presentations, the lack of curiosity, the black and white thinking, it runs through, for me, it's part of the clinical picture that we've been describing, this sort of certainty, this is the solution, I've got a uniform, that's going to protect me from all of the problems that the world are going to throw at me. But it's also infected our clinical environments because we see the same thing time and time again. Why didn't GIDs do the research? They were the national centre for 20 years. They got all the money, they got all the dosh. Why aren't they following the kids up? It's because curiosity, I think somebody asked the question about how do you talk to your kid who is actually defended against curiosity. They're wrapped in certainty. All the curiosity, anxiety is with the parents. It's all been projected. And they see you, in terms of your curiosity and your thinking, as the enemy. It's exactly the same with the professions. That's why we've ended up in this terrible situation that we're in, where we've got no research, there's no sort of dialogue and debate, as Hilary Cass, but also as David Taylor brought up, when he did a report in 2006 in relation to Sue blowing the whistle, he basically said everything that Hilary Cass said and Dave Bell said, like 16 years later. It was all in the original report. It was all buried by, unfortunately, the trust that brought me up and trained me and employed me and all the rest of it, the Tavistock. Right. Just a word to say, Sue and I wrote this book. I've got another book coming out called Identity and the Foundational Myth, and the support from SEGM has been fantastic over a long period of time in terms of trying to get articles. Very difficult to get them published in psychoanalytic journals, but when I do, very grateful to the Journal of Child Psychotherapy, which is a big supporter, but SEGM, you know, always try and give a bit of money so the papers can go online and then they can be seen by a wider audience, which is very important. Fragile internal world. These are the kids. They're extremely fragile. The more fragile, the more they're looking for a sort of certain shield in which they can identify, like a sort of uniform as a sort of solution to life. You often think puberty blockers, in a way, it's like putting a lid on development. I think Jacko talked about it. It was a psychoanalyst called Laufer. In a way, the latency child, quite protected, often lacking sort of ordinary exploratory desire, aggression, etc., etc. This is a generalization. Then puberty comes along. It's like throwing a huge rock into a nice smooth pond, and some kids are just not ready for it. And this is where Domenico came up with this very unhelpful idea about putting a pause on puberty. But one can feel the anxiety and turbulence that the kids are experiencing, and that's why he went to sort of puberty blockers. Just one thing, people have talked a lot about the physiological, psychological, sexual changes, etc., etc. Oh yeah, Laufer said, the job of adolescence is to take responsibility for the sexed body as you're moving through into the adult world. That's an anxiety-provoking situation. The thing about us humans, and the things that makes being human more difficult than most of the animal kingdom, is our frontal lobe's development and capacity to see into the future so that we can think and strategize. The problem with that is it produces all sorts of anxieties about what the future will bring. Will anybody love me? Will I be able to work? Will I fit in with the family, etc., etc.? So adolescence and this frontal lobe is a particular problem because you can't know what is going to happen in the future. And a lot of these kids, there's no thought. We talked about, why do you want to become a girl? Why do you want to become a boy? There's very little thought about their futures. There was a presentation and people were thinking about the future. Stephen Levine often talks about, where are you going? Where are you heading? And that's extremely important for us to think about. The child themselves is trying not to think about it. They're trying to sort of put the blocker on. I've lost touch with my my anchor in reality, which is my slides. Yeah, okay. Mourning and change. Yes, thank you very much. Mourning and change. It's another thing, isn't it? As we go through the various different stages, we have to relinquish being a child, mum and, all sorts of different children, but mum and dad look after me, they make all the decisions. We don't ever quite relinquish. We're all quite childish. I think I'm still an adolescent. I'm 63. When am I going to grow up? I think my mother thinks that. When is he actually going to grow up? The thing is that, but one separates out the child from the adolescent, from the adult, from now the older person, as far as I'm concerned. That process of mourning, of being able to give up an identity, give up a sort of belief structure. This is who I am. I used to be quite athletic. I now struggle to get out of bed. I'm having to relinquish this idea that I could do a marathon tomorrow in order to come to terms with the fact my Achilles won't take it and I'll end up in some sort of pain. This is also a sort of psychologically demanding process. Mourning is a difficult thing for all of us to do through the different stages of life. And if you're particularly anxious and you feel this is me and I don't want to take in what the world is sort of reflecting back to me, it becomes more difficult still and you tend to sort of want to hunker down. Group belonging, I'm not going to touch a lot on that. There's often this argument about the individual versus the group. For me, certain fragile individuals are searching for a sense of belonging. If they find an online group that says, come and join us, we're a sort of odd bunch, and there'll be no criticism. What gets chucked, the baby that gets chucked out with the bathwater in terms of judgment is thought. Because judgment and judgmentalism is confused with thought. So they're often joining groups. There are various rules and regulations of these groups, as we know. They're quite tyrannical. But in some ways, there's a sort of sense that You're persecuted, you don't feel you fit in, well, you fit in here, here's the church. So for me, the individual goes with the sort of contagion that we've been talking about. It's not one or the other, it's both. Right, how are we doing? Reality testing. Psychologists tell us a lot about reality testing. My perception of myself in relation to the external world, this is a painful process. At one stage, I was a decent rugby player. I thought I should play for England. The bloke picking the team disagreed. One of us is wrong. It's painful for me to think he might be right, I might be wrong. This is the process of reality testing. And in a sort of healthy state, when we feel up to it, we're in touch with and able to say, I think your point about identity is not a fixed thing. It's in relation to ourselves and the external world. This is a painful, evolving process. And trying to fix your identity, we all want to sort of think, this is how I am. But when we exchange probability for certainty, then we're, in a sense, excluding the sort of flexibility that is required to say, I don't control the world, and I have to adapt, both to my changes, but also to the way the world sees me. Now, yes, right, the clinical difficulty that people have talked about, and I think someone raised the question about this over there, which is the sort of binary problem. You're either a member of the church, you're for me, or you're against me. And this is what the therapist is confronted with immediately. It's this sort of black and white, whose side are you on? And often when I see the young adults, I don't see the kids, but when the young adults come, they come with an assumption. You're working for mum and dad. I want the puberty block. I want the cross-sex hormones, but this is the deal. I've got to see you. You're a bigot. And then I'll tick the box and mum and dad will go, okay, fine, go and have your surgery, okay? My position is I am there to understand who they are as a person. I'm not going to focus on gender. I really see this as an identity developmental problem. I said to Hilary Cass, I would get rid of all the specialist services. I ditched them. All of the money should go into CAMS services so that people are getting broad, generic CAMS treatment and understanding into family therapy, psychotherapy, you name it. Get rid of the specialism. The moment you go and see a specialist, the specialist is going to tell you this is what your problem is. And that is exactly the problem. We're trying to extract ourselves from the rabbit hole, not go down into it. The doubts and insecurities are all projected. They're often in the family. You know, the kid is absolutely certain. Mum and dad are terrified, and they've got all the doubts. So it's all been projected. I was interested in Stephen's point about sometimes the anxiolytics to just reduce the anxiety to allow them to feel a bit more anxious might be helpful with certain cases. I'm not an idealizer of psychotropic medication, but sometimes it can make the patient more available because it's the anxiety which is then projected and the certainty which they adopt as a defense which makes them unable to think in flexible ways about whether there's any other way of thinking about this problem. So sometimes, I'm not a psychiatrist, so I don't prescribe antipsychotics, but anxiolytics, but I can see how that could work. Right, good. How are we doing? Now, these are the two, I'm going to talk about two supervisors of mine. Ron Britton, he's just died, unfortunately, a month ago. He came up with this idea of triangular space. And what he talked about was, we talked a lot about the problem of concrete thinking. It's endemic in the patient population. It's endemic in the way that we deal with the patient population. Problem is, when a patient comes to you in a concrete state of mind, they want a concrete response. And sometimes we give them a concrete response. What Ron Britton's talking about is there's a lack, in a way, of the individual's capacity to triangulate. What he thought of a sort of internalization of what he called the parental couple. Doesn't have to be male and female, it's not that, it's about, I've got a relationship with Joan, and I've got a relationship with John, and they're different sorts of relationships, but sometimes I'm excluded from the relationship between Joan and John. They talk to each other, and sometimes they have views of me, which I don't control, and sometimes I have views of what my parents are like. So he thought of this as this sort of triangular space in which there are various different ways of relating and thinking, including one, importantly for symbolic thinking and imagination, one in which you're not involved in a dyad, you're involved in a triangular situation. And I think a lot of the technical problems that we talked about is this lack of triangulation. So when Sue's talking about these two therapists working with the couple, one is being active agent, the other is observing what the active agent can't see. So I'm not being too concrete about it, but I always think of this triangulation and myself in terms of the patient presenting in a very concrete way. I've got no imagination, I've got no ideas. And I'm more talking to myself, what the hell am I going to do about this, than I am responding to the child, because we're going to get into a dialogue that goes nowhere. Right. Okay. So Harry Potter, we're all, big fans of J.K. Rowling. She's been there in various different ways from the beginning. In the Deathly Hallows, Harry is about to meet Voldemort for the one-off, battle. And his parents turn up, both dead in his mind, and they support him and think about different possibilities. And that is really what I'm talking about. We're not conscious of that, but we've got these internal figures, sometimes helpful, sometimes critical. Sometimes my mother goes, Marcus, you know what you're like. She did it the other day, actually, about something she wasn't very happy about. So I'm still being supervised by my mother and my wife. I've got various supervisors. Not all of them have that much control over me, which they complain about. The next thing is, in terms of this shield, the development of, the guy who was talking about autism in Australia is here. Anyway, avatars. They develop a fiction. If only I was X. I don't like who I am. I'm going to become this. And they invest in this if only fantasy, basically saying, I'm not me as I need to be. I'm going to be this figure. Right. Next person I'm going to introduce you to, I think Joe's going to talk about this other second supervisor, guy called John Steiner. He talks about a psychic retreat. A psychic retreat is a structure of defenses that protects the individual from the demands of a changing reality. You could think of it as a club. We've all got them, mine's the rugby club. But psychically, we sort of retreat into these psychic retreats. The problem with them, and we all need them because we need our defensive structures, we need our supportive base in a turbulent world. The problem is when they're very rigid and controlling, they actually inhibit development. Because development is a painful process in which there's a bit of confusion, there's an experience of loss. And as I say, if you find that difficult to manage, then you retreat into your bowls club or whatever your psychological equivalent is. Ron Britton, they're big pals. Ron Britton's addition is that these internal structures are based on certainty rather than probability. We all need a structure. We all need beliefs. We've got to believe that the EasyJet isn't going to cancel our flight back to Blighty tomorrow because I've got a bloody clinic and blah, blah, blah. I need to believe that EasyJet are going to come up with the goods. I couldn't live with the anxiety of thinking, oh no, the plane's going to be cancelled. But it's based on a probability. It's not a certainty because EasyJet can sometimes cancel flights. Right. Now, this is, so I wrote this paper, I think there were people who were anxious I was going to be too psychoanalytic and put everybody off and upset everybody. But I wrote this paper, which is about the parallel between what goes on with the kids and the avoidance of psychological pain and what we saw in the GIDS clinic, because they were very similar. There's a sort of parallel structure. And I think the affirmation model is a sort of pain avoidance system in which the kid and the professional agree that there's a concrete solution to their psychological difficulties. All of the sort of painful questioning that Sue's talking about is, how do I find a way of talking to this kid without making them feel I'm the enemy, but without colluding? This is a painstaking, difficult process and requires quite a lot of experience. The GIDS team, by the way, in terms of the makeup of the team, there are a lot of quite inexperienced people in it doing some of the most difficult work. And I think experience helps you not panic too much, thinking, what the hell am I going to do or say to this kid when I'm under so much pressure? They're going for a, double mastectomy next week, and what the hell am I going to do? Right. So I'm saying there's this sort of whole institutional mirroring. I'll cut to the end. But really what I want to say is the lack of curiosity and the rigidity in the belief system in the affirmation model is reflected in the clinical problem itself. Okay, they're not, these two things are creatures of each other. They're not, it comes from the outside world. The political interference has been awful and doesn't help anybody. But they're a symptom of the problem. So, clinical stance. I start from the point of view, I'm trying to understand this kid in the broadest sense, as Sue said, of which their preoccupation with gender is a symptom, and as Stephen Levine said, of a wider problem. And I'm trying to understand who is this kid, what is their problem in the context of the family. Pain's a signal. Pain's healthy. It tells us that there's a problem that needs attention. Anxiety's helpful. It's got a bad rap at the moment. Everyone wants to get rid of it. Actually, anxiety's essential. And it's a question of going, what's the anxiety about? Certainty. Often the gender clinics will say, the kid was certain. Crikey, I get worried about the fact of whether I'm going to have bacon in the morning. I'm exaggerating. I don't worry about having bacon in the morning. But what I'm saying is it is a normal part of thoughtful process that you are worried and uncertain about difficult decisions. Certainly, if you're going to have a double mastectomy, you should be worried about it. The absence of doubt and anxiety is, for me, a red flag. It's not something to pin and go, it's fine, on you go. There's nothing to worry about. Right, hang on. I was just one more thing, and that is the thing that Sue brought up. There's a mania about it. That often there is a sort of manic, people call it, you're on some sort of treadmill, which is going faster and faster and faster, with people cheering you on towards more, further and further along the medical pathway. It's all part of a manic defense. And actually what you're trying to do is slow the kid down, say, we can actually think about you and your mind. It's not going to kill you. We can manage it. It might be a little bit frightening. We get it. So my stance is a bit like the affirmation model in that I start by saying I want to understand where the patient's coming from. What are they thinking about? Why do they perceive themselves in this particular way? I want to get into their mind and then interest them in other ways of thinking about themselves. And that's the clinical problem of trying to sort of engage them in thinking about the way their minds work. Because what they think is normal, I'm saying, is a rather rigid, fixed state that doesn't really prepare them for the adult world in any productive way. It's a sort of, you're shutting down your options in lots of different ways. there is, diagnostically, psychiatry is getting obsessed with more and more precise ways of defining the human condition. Okay, I'm not against diagnosis, psychosis, neurosis, borderline states. It's quite helpful to know which world you're in, okay, because for prognostic reasons and for just to say we're not very good at prognosis in psychiatry, and anyone who tells you otherwise, I don't think has much clinical experience or is a zealot. Sorry to be so emphatic about that, but at 45, I'm getting a bit short-tempered. 63. I wish I was 45, blimey. That would be marvellous. But the splitting off of the individual, there was someone presented, they were, and this is what happens, here's a gender dysphoria, you've got depression, you go, the hatred of the self is part of the presentation of gender dysphoria. That's your business. Who is this person? Why are they suffering from this extreme hatred of themselves? That's your job to understand that, not as a split-off thing. They're a whole. And this movement in psychiatry is bad news. We need to get away from it because there is no cure for the human condition. We just, none of us are going to get through this unscathed. We've got to find a way of doing the best we can to get through it, and it's not going to be cured by psychiatry.